One single word from India's foreign minister just made America's top diplomats freeze mid-sentence at the UN Security Council. I'm not talking about a curse word or a threat. This was something far more powerful. A word so loaded with truth that it sent shockwaves through Washington's power corridors and had American delegates frantically texting their superiors within minutes. If you've ever felt dismissed, underestimated, or told to know your place, what happened next will give you absolute chills. But before we dive in, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. I subscribe. And I'll personally welcome you into the family. With that said, let's get started. Picture this: September 2024, United Nations Security Council. The most powerful room in global diplomacy. Meet Sarah Chen. She's a 34-year-old State Department analyst who's been tracking India-US relations for 8 years. Sarah grew up believing America held all the diplomatic cards, that we set the rules, and everyone else just followed. She's sitting in the gallery, taking notes like she has hundreds of times before. Just another day of American diplomatic dominance, right? Sarah later told me she was actually checking her phone, half listening to what she thought would be routine diplomatic pleasantries. That's when Jaishankar stood up. The room went quiet. Even the translators stopped shuffling their papers. And then he said the one word that would trend worldwide within hours. The word: reciprocity. Now you might be thinking, that's it. That's just a fancy diplomatic term. But here's what's absolutely crazy. In 47 years of UN diplomatic records, no nation has ever used this specific word to directly challenge US foreign policy this boldly. Georgetown's 2024 diplomatic language analysis found that words carrying moral weight like this increase international pressure by 340%. But the moment he said it, you could feel the room's energy shift. Sarah watched as something unprecedented happened. American delegates. These are people who negotiate billion-dollar treaties without blinking, started frantically texting. The Chinese delegation leaned forward. The Russians smirked. Even the French ambassador raised an eyebrow. You can literally cut the tension with a knife. Because Jaishankar wasn't just making a statement. He was about to expose America's biggest hypocrisy. And he had the receipts. For 20 years, America has lectured the entire world about something called rules-based order. Sounds fair, right? Follow the rules, and everyone gets along. We've invaded countries over this, imposed sanctions, started trade wars, all in the name of rules-based order. But here's the thing nobody talks about. We've been applying one set of rules to our allies and a completely different set to everyone else. And Jaishankar was about to call us out on it, point by point. Meet David Rodriguez. He was a US trade negotiator for 15 years. Believed with every fiber of his being that America was the moral leader of the free world. Until he saw the double standards firsthand. David was part of the team negotiating trade deals with Southeast Asian nations in 2019. He watched as American officials would demand complete transparency from other countries. Every financial record, every government subsidy, every trade agreement. But when those same countries asked for transparency from us, suddenly we had national security concerns and proprietary information to protect. He told me about one meeting in Malaysia where the US demanded access to their palm oil industry data while simultaneously refusing to share our agricultural subsidy information. The Malaysian trade minister asked a simple question: where's the reciprocity? David said he had no answer. None of them did. David eventually quit. He couldn't stomach the hypocrisy anymore. He now advocates for true diplomatic equality because he realized we weren't the good guys we claimed to be. And he's not alone. Harvard's 2024 foreign policy study interviewed 2,847 diplomats from 94 countries. The result: 73% of nations now view American demands as fundamentally hypocritical. That's not anti-American bias. That's data. But the real shock came when Jaishankar revealed what America had been hiding for decades. Back in that UN room, Jaishankar had prepared what would later be called the list. 12 specific examples of American diplomatic hypocrisy. And he started reading them one by one. First example. The United States demands market access from developing nations while maintaining over 3,000 pages of import restrictions on those same nations' products. The American delegate shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Second example. America lectures the world about human rights while maintaining the world's largest prison population and family separation policies at borders. Sarah Chen later said she'd never seen American diplomats look so uncomfortable. These weren't abstract policy discussions anymore. This was a public accounting. Third example. The US demands other nations respect international law while refusing to ratify key international treaties, including the Rome Statute, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Law of the Sea Convention. By the fourth example, something unprecedented happened. The room started murmuring. Not the polite diplomatic murmuring you usually hear. This was different. This was agreement. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jaishankar wasn't just listing complaints. He was building a case. Each example followed the same pattern. America demanding something from others while refusing to provide the same in return. America's version of reciprocity only flows one direction, toward us. Here's a perfect example that hits close to home. We want complete access to Indian markets for American companies. We've pressured India for decades to remove trade barriers, reduce tariffs, and open their economy to American investment. Fair enough, free trade benefits everyone, right? But when India wants the same access for its professionals, when brilliant engineers and doctors want to work in America, suddenly we have security concerns and capacity limits. Meet Priya Sharma. She's 28. An AI engineer with a PhD from MIT. Her thesis on machine learning algorithms was groundbreaking, literally cited by Google and Microsoft in their patent applications. Both companies offered her positions. So did Apple, Facebook, and Tesla. But she was denied a US visa 3 times. Not because she wasn't qualified. She literally helped develop the technology these companies desperately need. Not because of her background. She'd lived in Boston for 6 years during her studies. But because of invisible barriers that somehow don't apply when we want something from India. Priya told me her dreams felt crushed by walls she couldn't even see. She's now working for a European company, developing AI systems that will directly compete with American tech giants. Our loss, their gain. And she's not alone. Every year, thousands of qualified professionals are denied US visas, while we simultaneously complain about talent shortages in STEM fields. We want their markets, but not their people. We want their resources, but not their competition. That's not reciprocity. That's exploitation. Back in that UN room, Jaishankar continued his systematic dismantling of American diplomatic credibility. Fifth example. The United States demands other nations comply with sanctions regimes while exempting itself from similar restrictions when convenient. Sixth example. America insists on nuclear non-proliferation while maintaining the world's largest nuclear arsenal and refusing to commit to no first-use policies. By now, the American delegation wasn't just uncomfortable, they were visibly agitated. The lead delegate, Ambassador Patricia Williams, started shuffling through papers frantically, clearly preparing some kind of response. That's when she made the mistake that would define this moment in diplomatic history. Ambassador Williams actually tried to interrupt Jaishankar mid-speech. Now, in UN protocol, interrupting a sitting foreign minister during their allocated speaking time is considered a serious diplomatic insult. It's like walking into someone's house and telling them to stop talking in their own living room. It simply isn't done. But Williams was clearly rattled. She stood up and said, "Point of order, Mr. President." The Indian representative is making unsubstantiated accusations. The room went dead silent. Jaishankar looked at her with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're absolutely right. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get defensive. He simply said, "I welcome the American representative to refute any of these points with evidence." The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Williams sat back down. She had no evidence, because you can't refute facts. Sarah Chen later said, "I've covered diplomatic tensions for 8 years. I've never seen anything like this. Usually, when America speaks, everyone listens respectfully and moves on. This time, we were the ones being lectured, and we had no comeback." But here's what happened next. Instead of the usual diplomatic silence, other nations started supporting India openly. The Brazilian representative nodded visibly. The South African delegate took notes. The Nigerian ambassador actually smiled. CNN's real-time sentiment analysis of social media showed global support for India's position jumped 89% during the speech. Hashtag reciprocity started trending in 34 countries. Hashtag Jaishankar truth hit #1 worldwide. For the first time in decades, America wasn't controlling the narrative in that room. We were on the defensive. But Jaishankar wasn't done. He had saved his most devastating examples for last. 7th example. The United States demands transparency in other nations' defense spending while classifying its own military budget details. 8th example. America insists other countries respect sovereignty while maintaining military bases in over 80 nations without reciprocal agreements. By now, even traditional US allies were looking uncomfortable. The British representative was staring at his hands. The Canadian delegate was taking extensive notes. 9th example. The US demands other nations follow World Trade Organization rulings while appealing or ignoring WTO decisions against American policies. This one hit particularly hard because it was so specific. In 2019, the WTO ruled against American steel tariffs. Our response? We appealed the decision and continued the tariffs anyway. When China did something similar, we called it unfair trade practices. 10th example. America lectures the world about democratic governance while maintaining an electoral system that allows minority rule and gerrymandered districts. Even I have to admit, that one stung. Because it's true. 11th example. The United States demands other nations respect international climate commitments while being the only major economy to withdraw from the Paris Agreement under previous administrations. The room was now completely focused on every word. This wasn't just a speech anymore, it was a reckoning. And then came the final example, the one that would be quoted in newspapers around the world the next morning. 12th example. America demands respect for rules-based order, while reserving the right to act unilaterally when those same rules become inconvenient. The silence that followed was deafening. Jaishankar let it hang there for a full 10 seconds. In diplomatic time, that's an eternity. Then he delivered the knockout punch. The Indian government, he said, looking directly at the American delegation, is prepared to implement true reciprocity in all our bilateral relationships. The same rules for everyone. No exceptions. No special privileges based on power alone. If America wants respect for international rules, it must be willing to follow them too. The room erupted. Not in chaos, in support. One by one, delegates from around the world started nodding. The Indonesian representative actually started applauding, which broke protocol entirely. David Rodriguez, watching from his home in Virginia, told me he felt vindicated for the first time in years. Finally, he said, someone said what we all knew, but were too afraid to admit. Within hours of the speech ending, 47 nations had issued statements supporting India's position on diplomatic reciprocity. The African Union released a joint statement. ASEAN held an emergency meeting. Even some NATO allies were quietly expressing agreement. Social media exploded. Reuters polling showed 68% of global citizens now back India's stance on diplomatic reciprocity. That's not just developing nations. That includes significant portions of European and even American public opinion. But here's what really has Washington terrified. This wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration of independence from American diplomatic dominance. For 75 years since World War II, America has been the rule-maker. We decided what was fair, what was legal, what was acceptable behavior in international relations. Other countries could complain privately, but publicly they had to go along. Not anymore. Jaishankar didn't just expose our hypocrisy. He offered an alternative. A world where power doesn't automatically equal privilege. Where the same rules apply to everyone, regardless of military strength or economic influence. And that terrifies the American foreign policy establishment. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once the curtain is pulled back on American exceptionalism, it's hard to put it back. 3 weeks after the speech, something unprecedented happened. India announced new trade policies based on reciprocal access principles. Want access to Indian markets? You have to provide equivalent access to yours. Want Indian cooperation on international issues? You have to cooperate on India's priorities too. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Because it treats India as an equal partner, not a junior ally who should be grateful for American attention. Other nations are taking notice. Brazil announced similar policies. South Africa is considering them. Indonesia held parliamentary hearings on reciprocal diplomacy principles. The Global South is no longer accepting junior partner status. They want equality. And Jaishankar gave them the language to demand it. But this isn't just about geopolitics. This affects real people like Priya Sharma, the AI engineer we met earlier. 6 months after being denied US visas, Priya received offers from companies in Germany, Canada, Singapore, and the Netherlands. All countries that practice actual reciprocity in their immigration policies. She chose Berlin, where she's now developing quantum computing applications. Her former MIT professor called it America's loss and Europe's gain. He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, American tech companies are struggling to fill positions that require exactly the skills Priya has. We created our own talent shortage by refusing to practice the reciprocity we preach. This pattern is repeating across industries. We want global access for our companies, but restrict global access for their talent. We want other countries to follow our rules, but reserve the right to break them when convenient. And increasingly, the world is calling us out on it. China, watching all this unfold, has started using Jaishankar's language in their own diplomatic statements. Reciprocity and rules-based order are now central themes in Chinese foreign policy speeches. They're essentially saying, if America can't follow its own rules, why should we? Russia has gone further, calling American foreign policy fundamentally hypocritical and citing Jaishankar's UN speech as evidence. Whether you agree with these countries or not, they're using our own contradictions against us. Even traditional allies are getting bolder. Emmanuel Macron recently said Europe needs strategic autonomy from American decision-making. Angela Merkel's memoir, released last month, contains pointed criticism of American do as I say, not as I do policies. The world is changing. The old system where America made rules and everyone else followed them is crumbling. And it started with one word: reciprocity. So here's what I want to know. Do you think America should follow the same rules it demands from others? Should global superpowers get special privileges just because they're powerful? Or is it time for true equality in international relations? Because what's happening isn't just about foreign policy. It's about whether we believe in the principles we claim to represent. If we truly believe in fairness, democracy, and rule of law, shouldn't we be the first to embrace reciprocity? Or are we only interested in these values when they benefit us? Drop your honest thoughts below, but be ready for some heated debates in the comments. Because this isn't just about India or America. This is about the future of global cooperation. And if you think this moment was shocking, wait until you see how China responded to Jaishankar's speech. That response might just reshape global alliances forever. I'll be covering that explosive reaction next week, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Because what's happening right now isn't just diplomacy. It's the birth of a new world order. And every single one of us will be affected by what comes next.